The Worst Witch by Jill Murphy. Read by Olivia MacDonald. Chapter 9. The school was still completely deserted when Mildred arrived once more at the heavy iron gates. She hurried up the spiral staircase to her room and unpacked her bags so that no one would know she had tried to run away. Just as she was making her way to the door with the box in her arms, the door opened and Miss Hardbroom appeared. "Would you kindly tell me what you are doing, Mildred?" she asked frostily. "I have just watched you creeping up the corridor, complete with broomstick, cat, a bag, and this cardboard box. Is it too much to ask for an explanation?" "Oh, no, Miss Hardbroom," replied Mildred, holding up the box for her form mistress to see the contents. "You see, I found a crowd of witches on the mountainside, and they were planning to take over the school and change you all into frogs, and they were making an invisibility potion so you wouldn't be able to see them, so I turned them all into snails and brought—" Her words trailed into silence as she saw the expression on Miss Hardbroom's face. Obviously, her form mistress didn't believe a word. "I suppose these are the witches?" she asked bitterly, pointing to the snails which were all huddled up in the corner of the box. "Yes, they are," Mildred insisted desperately. "I know it sounds a peculiar story, Miss Hardbroom, but you must believe me. Their broomsticks and cauldrons and things are still in the clearing where I found them. Really." "Well, you had better show the creatures to Miss Cackle," said Miss Hardbroom nastily. "Go and wait in Miss Cackle's office while I fetch her. And I hope this isn't any sort of joke, Mildred. I seem to remember that you are already in a considerable amount of trouble." Mildred was perched nervously on the edge of the chair in the headmistress's office when Miss Hardbroom returned with Miss Cackle, who was wearing a grey dressing gown and looked half asleep. "These are they," stated Miss Hardbroom, pointing to the box on the desk. Miss Cackle sat down heavily in her chair and looked first into the box and then at Mildred. "Mildred," she said in dramatic tones, "I am still suffering from my public humiliation last night. Because of you, the reputation of this school now lies in the mud. And yet you expect me to believe an incredible story like this?" "But it's true," cried Mildred. "I can even describe some of them. One was tall and thin with thick grey hair, and there was another who looked just like you, Miss Cackle, if you'll excuse me being personal. She had green horn-rimmed glasses." "Oh, wait a moment," said Miss Cackle, pushing her own glasses onto her nose. Did you say she had horn-rimmed glasses and looked like me?" "Yes, Miss Cackle," replied Mildred, blushing. "Green ones. I'm sorry if you thought I was being rude." "Oh, no, child, it isn't that," said Miss Cackle, peering into the box. Then she turned to Miss Hardbroom. "Do you know, I think the girl might be right after all. The person whom she describes sounds exactly like my wicked sister Agatha, who has always been extremely jealous of my position at this academy." Miss Cackle stared over her glasses at the snails. "Well, well, Agatha," she chuckled. "So we meet again. I wonder which of these beauties you are. What shall we do with them, Miss Hardbroom?" "I suggest we change them back to their natural form again." "But we can't," cried Miss Cackle in dismay. "There are 20 of them." Miss Hardbroom looked faintly amused. "May I point out," she said, "paragraph 5 and rule number 7 in the Witches' Code states that anyone having been changed into any type of animal by another witch for purpose of self-defense cannot, on being changed back again, practice any form of magic against their captor. In other words, they must admit defeat." Miss Cackle looked embarrassed. "Oh, yes," she said brightly. "I remember now. It slipped my mind for the moment. Do you hear that, Agatha? Do you think they can hear us, Miss Hardbroom?" "Most certainly," replied Miss Hardborough. "Perhaps you could line them up on your desk and ask your sister to step forward." "What a splendid idea!" said Miss Cackle, who was beginning to enjoy herself. "Help me, Mildred, my dear." They lined up the snails on the desk, and Miss Cackle asked Agatha to step forward. One snail shuffled rather reluctantly out of line. "Listen, Agatha," said Miss Cackle. "You must admit that you don't really have much of a choice. If you will agree to abide by the witch's code, then we can change you back, but not otherwise. If you agree, go back into line so that we know what you want us to do." The snail shuffled back into line again. Miss Hardborough spoke the words of the spell which released them, and suddenly the room was full of witches, all looking furious and talking at the same time. The noise was terrible. "Will you be quiet at once?" commanded Miss Cackle. She turned to Mildred, who was still perched on her chair. "You may go back to bed, Mildred, and in view of what you have done for the school this morning, I think we will have to forget about the interview you were to have had with Miss Hardborough and myself this afternoon. Don't you agree, Miss Hardborough?" Miss Hardborough raised one eyebrow, and Mildred's heart sank. "Before I agree, Miss Cackle, if you'll forgive me," she said, "I would just like to ask Mildred what she was doing wandering around on the mountains when she should have been in bed." I was out for a walk, Miss Hardborough," replied Mildred. "And you just so happened to have your spell book with you?" "Yes," agreed Mildred unhappily. "Such devotion to the school!" said Miss Hardborough, smiling in a most unpleasant way. "Taking your spell book with you wherever you go. I expect you were also singing the school song as you rambled along, weren't you, my dear?" Mildred looked at the floor. She could feel all the other witches staring at her. "I think we must let the child go to bed," said Miss Cackle. "Run along now, Mildred." Mildred shot out of the room before her form mistress could say anything else, and was in bed in 5 seconds. Chapter 10. At noon the rising bell clanged through the corridors, but Mildred pulled a pillow over her head and went back to sleep. It wasn't long before the door of her room burst open. "Wake up, Mildred!" shrieked Maud, seizing the pillow and hitting her friend over the head with it. Mildred screwed up her eyes against the daylight and saw what seemed to be hundreds of people all around the bed, talking and shouting. Maud was actually on the bed, bouncing up and down. "What's the matter?" asked Mildred sleepily. "As if you didn't know," replied Maud, breathless from the bouncing. "The whole school's talking about it." "About what?" said Mildred, who was still half asleep. "Will you wake up?" shrieked Maud, pulling the bedclothes back. "You saved the whole school from Miss Cackle's wicked sister, that's all." Mildred sat bolt upright. "So I did!" she exclaimed, and everyone laughed. "Miss Cackle's calling a meeting in the Great Hall," said Dawn and Gloria, 2 other members of Form 1. "You'd better hurry and dress. She'll expect you to be there." Mildred jumped out of bed, and her friends went off to the hall. She was soon ready and ran to join them, shoelaces trailing along the floor as usual. Maud had saved a place for her, and Mildred was embarrassed to notice that everyone stared as she came into the hall. While they waited for the teachers to arrive, Mildred decided to tell her friend about Ethel. "Listen," she whispered, leaning towards Maud so that no one could hear. "It wasn't my fault about the display. Ethel cast a spell on the broomstick that she lent me, and I know because she told me. Don't tell anyone else, will you? But I wanted you to know because I don't want you thinking I was just being clumsy." "But everyone already knows," said Maud. "Do they?" exclaimed Mildred. "Who told them?" "Well, you know what Ethel's like," replied Maud. "She just had to tell someone how clever she'd been, so she told Harriet, and Harriet thought it was a dreadful thing to do, so she told everyone else. No one's talking to Ethel now, and Miss Hardbram found out too, and she was furious with her." "Shh!" said someone. "They're coming." Everyone stood up as Miss Cackle came in, followed by Miss Hardbram and all the other teachers. "You may sit down, girls," said the headmistress. "As you all know, the school narrowly escaped invasion this morning. Had it not been for a certain young member of the school, we should not be here, but would be hopping about, turned into frogs." The girls laughed. "No, no, girls, do not laugh. It would not be funny at all had it happened. However, as it did not happen, I proclaim the rest of today a half-holiday in honour of Mildred Hubble. Mildred, would you come up here for a moment?" Mildred went bright red and was pushed to her feet. She stumbled through the rows of chairs, tripping over feet as she went, and clumped across the platform to Miss Cackle's table. "Now, don't be shy, my dear," said Miss Cackle, beaming. She turned to the school. "Come along, school! 3 cheers for our heroine, Mildred!" Mildred blushed and twisted her fingers behind her back as the cheers rang out. It was a relief to the heroine when it was all over. As they filed out of the hall, she was thumped on the back and congratulated by everyone, except for Ethel, who gave Mildred the nastiest look you've ever seen. "Good old Mill!" yelled someone. "We'll get out of our chanting test thanks to you," said someone else. "Thanks for the holiday." "Thanks, Mill," and so on. Maud flung an arm around her best friend. "You did look embarrassed," she said. "You went ever so red. I could see you from the back of the hall." "Oh, don't," said Mildred. "Let's go and fetch the kittens and make the most of our holiday." "One moment," said a chilling voice that they knew so well. The 2 girls turned to find their form mistress standing behind them. They jumped to attention at once, wondering what they had done, which was a natural reaction whenever Miss Hardbram spoke. This time, however, to their amazement, she smiled, a friendly smile, not like the usual curl at the corner of the lips. "I just wanted to say thank you, Mildred," she said. "Run along now, girls, and enjoy your holiday before it's over." She smiled again and vanished. The girls just stared at each other. "Sometimes," said Mildred, "I think she probably isn't as mean as we think she is." "Perhaps you are right, Mildred," said Miss Hardbram's voice from behind Mildred's ear, and the 2 girls jumped in horror. Mildred grabbed her friend's hand, and they hurried away down the corridor out into the misty playground, leaving Miss Hardbram's laughter echoing from nowhere along the empty passage. The